The first egg hit the window with a wet splat. James Jim Carter had been dozing in his recliner, an old war documentary playing in the background, when the sharp crack of impact jolted him awake. Then came another, and another. Thud, splat, crack. Jim sat up, his sharp blue eyes narrowing. He didn't move right away. Instead, he listened. He could hear them outside, laughing, running, the sound of sneakers scuffing against pavement. Teenagers. Jim exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he stood up, his movements slow but deliberate. His body may have aged, but his mind was as sharp as ever. More eggs pelted his house. The sound echoed in the quiet suburban street. Then, the screech of tires as a car peeled away, the taunting laughter fading into the night. Jim walked over to the window, his expression calm but cold, and pushed aside the curtain just enough to see the mess. Egg yolk dripped down the glass like melting wax. The porch was splattered with yellow and white, shells littering the steps like broken shrapnel. He took a deep breath. Not anger, not frustration, just understanding. He'd seen this before. Maybe not with eggs, but with men who thought they could get away with anything. They always thought they were untouchable, until they weren't. Jim's fingers flexed at his sides. It had been years since he'd dealt with punks like this. Years since he'd had a reason to remind someone exactly who they were messing with. Tonight, he had a reason. The next morning, the mess was even worse in daylight. Jim stepped out onto his porch, the cool morning air carrying the scent of dried egg and damp pavement. Neighbors whispered as they passed by, shaking their heads. "Damn, kids! You gonna call the cops, Jim?" Jim said nothing. He simply crouched, running 2 fingers through the mess before looking up at the street. Number. He wasn't calling the cops. Cops were for people who needed help. Jim? He'd handle this himself. Jim wasn't a cop, but he had spent 20 years hunting men who didn't want to be found. This question, Mark. This was easy. First, he checked his security camera footage. The grainy black and white video showed them laughing as they launched egg after egg at his house. 4 of them. Teenagers. Too cocky for their own good. They weren't smart enough to hide their faces. Better yet, their car was in full view, plates and all. Jim smirked to himself. A '99 Honda Civic, dented bumper. A sticker that read, "Born to break the rules," across the back window. Idiots. He jotted down the plate number, then got to work. Step 2. Tracking their route. Jim walked out onto the pavement, crouching to inspect the faint footprints left in the drying egg splatter. One set was smaller, a kid who probably wasn't the ringleader. Another had a worn-down heel scuffing against the pavement. Someone ran sloppily, but most importantly, they left tire marks when they sped off. Jim followed them. Tracking them down took less than an hour. The license plate led him straight to the address of one of their parents, an upscale suburban home a few miles away. Rich kids, of course. Jim parked down the street, watching as the group of teens lounged in their driveway, laughing, smoking, completely unaware that their night of fun was about to bite them in the ass. He stepped out of his truck, one of them. The ringleader, Corey, looked up and frowned. "Who's the old guy?" Jim kept walking, slow, steady, controlled, the way he used to approach enemy lines without giving away a damn thing. Corey smirked, turning back to his friends. "Hey, you lost, old man?" Jim stopped right in front of them. Corey's smirk faltered. Jim reached into his jacket. Corey flinched, but Jim only pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around to show them the security footage. The color drained from their faces. Corey's voice cracked. Look, man, it was just a joke." Jim tilted his head slightly. "That what you call it? A joke?" Corey laughed nervously, glancing at his friends for backup. Yeah, we didn't think it was a big deal." Jim nodded slowly. "Yeah, that's what I figured." And then, he turned and walked away. Corey blinked. "Wait, that's it? You're just leaving?" Jim didn't answer. He just got back in his truck and drove off. Corey laughed again, but it was shaky this time. "Damn, thought he was gonna do something." His friend nudged him. "Yeah, let's just forget about it. It's over." Except it wasn't. Because the next morning, they woke up to a surprise. The ringleader's house was covered in eggs. Not just eggs. A single boot print left on the hood of his car. A note taped to the front door. In neat, precise handwriting, it read, "I found you." Corey's heart dropped into his stomach. His hands shook as he ripped the note off the door. Guys, we have a problem." His friends showed up minutes later, their own faces pale as ghosts. "He did my house too." Same note. "Mine too, what the hell, man?" And then, a single text message buzzed on Corey's phone. "Unknown number. You get one chance to clean my house. No cops, no excuses. If it's not spotless by nightfall, I'll make sure the next lesson isn't as polite." Corey felt sweat drip down his back. "Guys, we need to fix this. Now." The air felt heavier than usual as the teenagers stood in Corey's driveway, staring at the eggs smeared across his windows, the boot print stamped on his car hood, and the note that sent shivers down their spines. It wasn't the mess that scared them. It was the message. Jim had found them. And the fact that a man his age had managed to do this without any of them seeing or hearing a thing, that was terrifying. Corey's hands shook slightly as he gripped his phone, staring at the unknown number that had sent the message. "You get one chance to clean my house. No cops, no excuses. If it's not spotless by nightfall, I'll make sure the next lesson isn't as polite." We have to do it, man." One of his friends, Tyson, swallowed hard. Corey whipped around, his face pale but still trying to maintain his bravado. "Are you serious? We're just gonna let some old dude scare us like this?" Tyson nodded furiously. "Did you hear him last night? He didn't even have to yell. He just stared." Corey scoffed, but the unease in his eyes betrayed his confidence. "It's just some washed-up vet trying to prove a point. So what? We egged his house. Big deal. He got us back. It's over." Ricky, the quietest of the group, shook his head slowly. "No, it's not." "What do you mean?" Corey snapped. Ricky turned his phone around, showing the screen. There was another message. "Unknown number. I see you talking. Clean the house. Clock's ticking." Corey's stomach dropped. "How the hell is he watching us?" Tyson turned in a slow circle, scanning the street, searching for him. Jim was nowhere in sight. By noon, the 4 teenagers were standing in front of Jim's house, buckets, rags, and cleaning supplies in hand. They had agreed to do it, not because they wanted to, but because none of them wanted to find out what Jim's next lesson would be. The house looked worse in daylight. The eggs had dried into a crusty mess, streaking down the windows, staining the walls. The boys set to work, scrubbing in silence, the occasional glance toward the street, expecting Jim to emerge at any moment. But he never did. The minutes stretched into an hour, then another. By late afternoon, the house was spotless. Corey wiped sweat from his brow, stepping back, inspecting the work. All right, we did it. Now let's get the hell out of here." They dropped their cleaning supplies and hurried toward their car. Tyson reached for the door handle. "Not so fast." The voice froze them in place. Jim was standing in the driveway. They hadn't even heard him come out. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable. He inspected the house slowly, nodding once. "Not bad." Corey swallowed hard. "Look, man, Jim raised a hand. "I don't need your apology. You cleaned up your mess. That's what matters." For a brief moment, relief washed over them. Maybe this was it. Maybe it was over. And then Jim stepped forward, his gaze hardening. "But let's be clear on something." The relief vanished. Jim walked right up to Corey, stopping just inches from him. The teenager had to fight the urge to step back. "If I ever see any of you disrespect another man's home again, you won't get a second chance." His voice was calm, but it carried weight. More weight than Corey had ever felt in his life. "You think life is just fun and games, don't you? That you can do whatever you want because there are no real consequences?" Corey said nothing. Jim's piercing blue eyes locked onto him like a scope on a rifle. "I've buried friends who didn't get second chances, who didn't get to come home because some cocky little punk thought rules didn't apply to them." Tyson gulped. Ricky looked at the ground. Jim leaned in slightly. "Consider this a gift." Corey nodded, unable to speak. Jim finally stepped back, glancing at the group. "Now get off my property!" The 4 of them bolted for the car. This time, they didn't laugh. They didn't joke. They didn't talk at all. They just drove. And Jim? He just watched them go, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. Lesson learned. And he didn't even have to raise his voice. That night, Corey lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The encounter with Jim played on repeat in his mind. He had never felt so small, so powerless. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. He flinched before grabbing it. A single text message. Unknown number? You made the right choice. Now keep making it. Corey let out a slow breath, staring at the screen. And for the first time in a long time, he actually felt grateful, because deep down, he knew he had gotten lucky.